So the question we're addressing now is how can we say that God is all powerful and that yet we as human beings exercise our own free will? So Thomas Aquinas is a thinker whose writing is very helpful when we're tackling this topic. So the first place to start, Thomas distinguishes between secondary causes and the primary cause. So secondary causes would be things like temporal processes. Okay, so these are the kind of things that we see happening in the world. So the Big Bang, the sort of the genesis of our universe as we know it in terms of the energy and the matter that was involved. So this is a secondary cause. We think about the cause of a human action is a human decision. It's a human being deciding to do something. This would also be a secondary cause. Now, as distinct from this is the primary cause. The primary cause, namely God, is what makes all of the above possible. The Big Bang could not have occurred if there were not some first mover to set that in motion, to create the matter and energy that's involved there. And in just the same way, human beings could not have the freedom to make decisions if it were not for God. So let's talk about this in terms of nature and grace and how this relates to human free will. So we can talk about nature, which is always a somewhat superficial category, but when we mean nature, we mean humans created capacities apart from God's supernatural help. Now, I say this is always somewhat of a superficial category because, all nature has come from supernature. All nature has come from God. We have the capacities we have because God has given them to us. So, all is grace in that sense. But nonetheless, it helps for conceptual clarification to talk about nature, assuming something, apart from, what human beings would be able to do without God's help. And then, of course, when we talk about God's help or God's gift of self to human beings, we use this term grace. Now, Aquinas would go on and make a number of distinctions. Even though grace is one, when we're talking about grace, we're just talking about God's gift of self, God's help. But again, to help us get our minds around the different ways that God helps us, we can break it down into these different kinds of grace. So Aquinas would talk, for example, about operating grace. Okay, so this is God's work on human beings. This is sort of the interior cause of human action. So, for example, when we talk about a human being making a decision, the operating grace, God working within us, is this operating grace, God moving the will to good instead of evil, inclining us in a good direction, or giving us sort of the will or the desire to do the good thing. In a sense, sometimes our will, our desire is not totally within our own control. This was certainly experience of Augustine, who was praying to give his life over to God, to change his ways, and yet felt that he just simply was not able to do it. He just simply did not have the will. When he finally had that conversion experience, he had that experience of God giving him the grace, God enabling him through that movement of the will to do what he had hoped for. So operating grace is God sort of doing God's work on human beings. Cooperating grace is human beings' cooperation with that grace. We can speak of the human action resulting from that assistance from God. So, for example, it is the action resulting, or the action or decision resulting from that movement of the will that is spurred by God's action. So in making this distinction, Aquinas is helping to clarify a little bit more how God is exercising an influence on human beings, namely, giving us the possibility of making a choice and exercising freedom. Yet we still must cooperate with that in making a decision. It's not that God forces us, or God is just a puppet master, controlling us puppets here down below. We generally have this opportunity, this freedom to cooperate with God's assistance. Okay. So just to summarize again, the major import of this is that, God is all powerful. God is, there's nothing outside of God's control. And yet part of what God is doing in the world is giving human beings this freedom to cooperate with God. So we are still free in spite of the fact that God is all powerful. So, so we're going to pause here. And rather than me continuing to talk, we're going to do something a little different. And I'm just going to have you review the reading that you did from the Sacks text, namely pages 69 to 71, where he's going to go through the historical development of the church's teaching on grace. So once you have reviewed that, you can then go ahead and do the next comprehension check. And then continue on after that.